Hi, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from Your Black World, and I wanted to talk about this incident with a professor by the name of Ersula Ore at Arizona State University. She was attacked by the police in a situation that is a little controversial right now. People don't know exactly what happened. The officers are saying one thing, she's saying another, but she has been charged with assaulting a police officer. She says that she was assaulted and it was self-defense. And I wanted to try to get to the bottom of it and really try to understand it and put it in perspective. So I reached out to the first person that came to mind when I saw what happened, and that's Dr. Chenelle Jones. Dr. Chenelle Jones, who's on the air with me now, she is a respected criminologist at Ohio Dominican University. So she understands life as a black female scholar and also understands life as it pertains to criminology, law enforcement, dealing with the police, etc. In fact, she wrote a great article that everyone should read. It's on culturecritic.com, and it's I want to say the title is something like 10 ways to deal with the police or something. She'll probably correct me on the title. But how are you doing today, Dr. Jones?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing really well, and I want to applaud you for withstanding my consistent yapping that I was doing before we started. Whenever I get on the air with you, there's always a million things I want to talk about, and I just end up yapping, and you just sit there and you patiently listen, and I respect that because I always believe that the best way to be a great teacher is to be a great student, and so you actually listen and try to understand things before you comment on them, and that was another one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you about this. So when you saw what happened with Professor Orr in her unfortunate interaction with the police, what was your feeling? What were your thoughts on this?
Oh my goodness. So I saw the video and the first thing was, oh my gosh, please don't slam her down on the ground. And they slammed her down on the ground and she had on a skirt, which is just terrible. But there were several things that, I read up on the story, saw what was going on. So apparently she was walking in the street, and that's because they were doing some construction work, so the sidewalks, she couldn't walk on them. And so apparently people all across this campus always walk across the street and no one has ever been cited. What I'm hearing though is that as she was walking in the streets, the police officer was turning the curb and they actually almost hit her. So he gave her a warning. This is what I hear. So, if you heard something different, let me know. But this is what I hear is that he almost hit her. So he got out of the car and said, hey, I almost hit you. Can you walk on the sidewalk? And then she says, well, look at the sidewalk. You can't walk on the sidewalk. They're doing construction. So eventually the officer started asking for her ID. She refused to give him the ID. And there were several other things, but eventually what happened apparently was that the confrontation just turned out to get really heated at some point, and that's when they actually started getting into some physical. Apparently she kicked him, he threw her on the ground. They were talking back to each other. So there was a lot of stuff going on. You have to go watch the video and see the entire thing, and you can form your own opinion and listen to statements afterwards. But after all this happened, the first thing is the officer, I think personally, was dead wrong in how he handled the situation. Officers have a lot of discretion, and probably the best way for him to handle that situation was to say, hey, I almost hit you. Can you be careful of the other cars or scoot over or something like that? Kept going on his way because he was supposed to be responding to a disabled vehicle, but he stopped and dealt with, this and got into an altercation with her. So that was my first thing. He could have handled the situation completely different. The other side of this, however, is that she also could have probably done a few things differently to make the incident less confrontational than what it was. Again, Doctor, you talked about my 10 tips for interacting with a police officer. And one thing that we know is that several states have laws and they're called identify laws, where you must identify yourself. So when he did ask for her identification, her license or something, she probably should have said somewhere, hey, do you know I'm a professor here? This, that, and the other. But that speaks to a greater issue that he automatically treated her the way that she did is, I always talk about this double marginality of women. Women, particularly black women, have to deal with not only issues of racism, but also issues of discrimination. And that police officer automatically probably assumed, because she was in a short dress, I don't know who this woman is, he already came up with all these assumptions about her, that he can just treat her and talk to her any sort of way, which was completely wrong. I still think the officer handled the situation completely wrong. But at the same time, like I said, she could have done some things differently. First off, she should have provided her ID. She probably shouldn't have gotten into the argument with the police officer. I always say, don't cuss out the cops, because in that moment, they have the power. And it's pretty much their word against yours. And so, thank God she has the video to back it up. But I believe the university issued a statement saying that the police officer acted within, his own rights, and they saw no wrong in that. So she's I don't think she's getting much support from the university. And
well, let me update you on that. That was the first statement the university issued, but we actually reported this on Your Black World. I like to say before a lot of the black news outlets found out about it, because someone sent it to me and said this sister's case deserves some publicity, or people need to know about this. And I shared it, and I remember I read it and I said, oh my God, and we put it out. And then what happened was, and I knew this was going to happen, then suddenly everybody else picked it up, the Root, News One, the Griot, Uptown Magazine, etc. And then it became viral. Now, Arizona State University, from what I'm speculating, has realized, oh my God, this is getting out of control. We got to deal with this. And so what's happened is, when something gets big, what happens is people change. They change their position. They shift. So Arizona State University issued a second statement saying, we're going to review the situation to make sure that her rights were not violated, et cetera, et cetera. So they kind of recanted their initial reaction. The police also have come out with an addendum to their statement saying that for the first time that the officer almost hit as you mentioned, the officer almost hit the woman as she was crossing the street. And before, initially, they didn't say that. And one other thing that's interesting here too is that this cop, I don't know if you know this, Dr. Jones, but he's a rookie cop. He's actually from he's like myself. His dad was a cop. My dad was a cop for 20 something years, and I think that's why I love talking about police issues with you, because we both understand that there's good and bad law enforcement. Not every cop is evil. It's not F the police every day, but there are some cops who need to be dealt with and held accountable. So that balance is there, and that's why I respect you. But anyway, he was a young guy, a rookie cop, so it sounds like he might have made a rookie mistake. It sounds like he might have handled this in a way that he wouldn't have handled it if he were a 10-year veteran of the force. Is that the impression that you've gotten?
I mean, it's a big rookie mistake, but yeah, I do think he made a huge mistake, and that's where he should have, I think his partner was there. They should have told him, this is how you handle the situation, because clearly he went about it all wrong. And that is problematic. So I hope they do go through with the investigation and, they drop these charges. These are some bogus charges. There's a move on petition. I think last time I checked, it has somewhere around 8,300 signatures. They need 10,000. So, go on there, tell your people, sign the petition or whatnot to have these charges dropped, because these are bogus charges. And we know that the state of Arizona has a history of issues dealing with racial profiling. And I think we just saw that again with this whole incident involving her. But, like I said, black women, they face, a double discrimination, a double marginality, regardless of the credentials. As we often see, she is an educated professor. She at the university, and her people there. Still, the police department went ahead and treated her like that. That's not the way they should have handled the situation. But like I said, she should have gave him the ID. Number one. She probably shouldn't have got smart with the police officers. You typically should not do that, because you will escalate the situation. There were several other things that probably could have been handled, but all in all, if the officer's intentions were ill will, and he already, had made up in his mind that she committed some crime, or she was going to commit a crime or whatnot, and he had these negative ideas about her, I don't know what else she could have done to fix that situation because it clearly was a huge rookie mistake if that's what happened.
hmm Yeah, I think so too. And just so people know, she does have a website up. It's a very well done website. It looks like somebody really spent some time on this, which is amazing because this didn't happen too long ago. Actually, scratch that. It happened on May 21st, so
Okay.
it's just now getting big publicity. So apparently, they've been pushing for publicity, and the site is it looks like Ers Legal Defense Fund, or sorry, erslegaldefense.com. That's ERS legaldefense.com. I guess her short name must be, or her nickname must be Urs for Ursula. And it looks like she's it's listing relevant incidents with the police, articles about what happened to her, the CNN article about the story, and also just so people know, the charges she's fighting right now, it appears, are resisting arrest, obstructing a road, refusing to give her name to a police officer, and aggravated assault. So these charges seem to be pretty serious. I don't know how much time she would be facing, but I think that we can agree that if you really look at things in the big picture sense, in my opinion, I don't think society's better off by locking up a professor. I mean, do you? I mean, maybe I'm looking at it too simplistically. Maybe it's about sort of following orders and maintaining stability in society. But Dr. Jones, it seems like it just, just from a policy standpoint, from a productivity standpoint for our country, does it even make sense to take a woman who is a working, law-abiding citizen, other than jaywalking apparently, and putting her behind bars? I mean, who wins if she goes to prison?
Well, no one wins. But again, when it comes with black women in the criminal justice system, they're just thought of as black women. They're still thought of as criminals. And there's not a lot of there's a whole I was actually in the midst of writing an article about the invisibility of black women in criminal justice. And what I find is that a lot of research is not done on black women. They are typically overlooked or excluded from mainstream criminological research and theories and all of this. And the issue is they're still disproportionately, like African American men, they're disproportionately involved in the criminal justice system. African American women make up somewhere around 7%, only 7% of the entire U.S. population, but they account for 23% of the women incarcerated in state and federal prisons. And their rates of arrest are significantly higher. They're like twice as likely than a white woman to be arrested for a crime. So, there are so many greater issues that we're seeing with this single issue with them calling out this professor and arresting her regardless of her credentials, because at the end of the day, when she is seen from a white police officer in the criminal justice system, is a disposable black woman. We always talk about black men and how they're disposable, but black women face that same fate, but at a higher level because they're dealing with issues of both race and gender.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean it's crazy, and it's just terrible that this situation has unfolded, but I'm glad it's getting a lot of publicity. I'm glad there's being light shed on, because at the end of the day, you're right. Society is not going to be better off by incarcerating a professor. She's an educator. She's probably done so much for that university, because as a professor, you have to give service, to the community, service to your department, service to the university, and all of this. And not only that, what she has done with probably her students, going above and beyond her call of duty, and then for this to happen, because I can only think of this, from some of the things that I've done on my university with helping out the departments and on the university-wide level. And I can only imagine if one of our campus police officers treated me that way, and then my university issued one statement initially, and then finally, after publicity happens, they issue another say, I would probably feel some kind of way about my university and be insulted.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's not helping anybody, and I think all parties could have handled this a lot different than how it was. I'm glad it's getting publicity. I hope people go and sign that move.org petition to get those the charges dropped. But this is very unfortunate.
Well, I hear you and I agree with you. I especially like what you said about black women being ignored in the criminal justice system. I think that is a serious problem, and really women in general. I think that if you even add that there, there are people who just say that that women are sort of the silent, unheard casualties of a lot of criminal behavior that they didn't even involve themselves with, right? You have the women serving 30 years in prison because their boyfriend was cooking crack in the kitchen, and she was afraid to speak up about it. And in fact, there was a woman in Texas. I don't remember her name right now, but her attorney reached out, and we did help with the case a little bit. Who got life in prison with no parole because her ex boyfriend was dealing drugs out of the house or something, and she didn't even know what was going on. At least that's what her attorney says the evidence says, and she was able to prove a lot of that. So in either way, even if she did know, or even if the evidence wasn't crystal clear, you have to ask: does it really make sense that she's in prison for life when maybe 3 years, 2 years, 5 years would have been enough to teach her a lesson and help her to make certain decisions, right? So I agree with that, which is actually one of the reasons why we really wanted to support the Free Her March and Rally that occurred in D.C. this couple weeks ago. I don't know if you heard about that, held by Andrea James. And I met Miss James at an incarceration conference, and she told me about the March and Rally, and she was doing this for women. And it's interesting because when I think about Andrea James, I think about what's kind of happening in our society as it relates to incarceration and how women are fortunately being made a part of this move to deal with the new Jim Crow. I think about the TV show Orange is the New Black. Have you ever seen that?
Oh yes, I've seen it.
Yeah, and what I like about the show is that I like the fact that they do a couple things. One, they humanize the prison population, remind you that these are human beings. These are people just like you who made certain choices or ended up in certain situations, and they didn't react to the situations that much differently from the way you would have reacted to them. So they're not subhuman. I like that, And then they expose the torture and the harsh conditions that occur behind bars, but then also they show what's going on with women behind bars in terms of the abuse that they experience at the hands of men and other inmates. In addition to that, and then the other, the last point that I really love is that I think it just kind of helps us to just understand what we're doing to our communities and families when we're incarcerating so many women and kind of throwing away the key. So I actually liked I like the show. I like the fact that that we're able to kind of talk about this, and I think that this work has to continue. I mean, can you give me your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I would definitely say this work has to continue. I have seen Orange is the New Black. I watch it. I think I just finished up with season 2 actually over the weekend. But in addition to Orange and New, I actually have been in real prisons, all female prisons, and there are some differences. And so the funny thing is, I find myself critiquing Orange is the New Black, saying this would never happen or this would happen, because I can differentiate between the made up stuff and the real things. But some of the issues there, of course, the abuse of women definitely occurs. There were issues with solitary that does occur when women are sent to the SHU, and those conditions are terrible. But the goal ultimately for punishment or for prisons and all of that should be to rehabilitate, and we need to really move to a rehabilitative and a restorative model. And I tell you, most African American women are nonviolent offenders. And, we saw that with this professor too. So again, that all ties back to the issue of, the purpose of punishment is to rehabilitate and to restore. And, why are we housing nonviolent offenders for 30 plus years in these horrible conditions? It's just not right. And that's not the way justice should be dealt out to people. And so, I hope that the charges are dropped for Dr. Ersula Ore, because they just don't make any sense at this point. I understand at this point, I think if they do go through with the charges, it is just at this point to prove a point for that police officer, but and to probably try to make her an example. But the reality of the situation is, she's probably done more good for that Arizona State University community than bad. And, I just don't think that charging her charges, they're felony charges that she has. Assaulting a police officer is a felony.
Yeah, well, you saw on the camera where she kicked the cop in the shin.
Yeah.
I mean, whoa. That's Yeah.
And she admitted to it too. That's why I
Well,
said
I mean, she can't deny it. I mean, that kick was like,
it,
pow, you know?
it got caught on camera, and she admitted to it in her statements and all of that. That's why I always said, why I said earlier that there are some things she could have done differently. Yeah, you probably shouldn't cuss out the cops. You probably shouldn't kick the cops. But, I still think those charges should be dropped. Excuse me. I don't know. I'm probably going to get some flack for that. But I just think there was probably more good, and there's probably a better way to handle the situation than pressing these charges and locking her up. That's not going to do any good to anybody.
Well, I mean, the best way to deal with it is to fix that damn sidewalk so people don't have to walk in the street. I mean, right. I mean, I mean, if you really break it down to the basics, I mean, she would not have been in the street if the sidewalk had not been screwed up, right? So,
Right.
and you've got all these other people walking across the street, most of them white, and you don't do anything to those people, but yet you somehow decide that this black woman needs to be slammed on her face for jaywalking. Come on now. And here's the point I was trying. I was when I was talking about Orange Is the New Black and linking it. I need to make this final point on this. Because I think it relates to Dr. Ore, and it brings it all together to hopefully at least partially prove that I'm not entirely crazy going off on ridiculous tangents. You have to think about class in the way we look at this case, the way we look at the Henry Louis Gates situation, which I think was similar to this. Here's the common thread between Ursula or Dr. Orr in her situation, say Henry Louis Gates, Andrea James, who held the Free Her March and Rally because she went to prison and saw what was going on there and wants to be an activist on this issue, and then Orange Is the New Black. The common thread that I see there is you're sort of elevating public awareness about torture in prison, police brutality, etc., because you're highlighting cases where it's happening to someone that it quote unquote is not supposed to happen to, right? Think about this. If Ursula Ore were not a professor, we wouldn't be talking about this. People wouldn't be talking about it. I mean, if she was just a regular black woman walking across the street, a woman with 2 or 3 kids or whatever, with no man in the house, people would have somehow seen it differently than they do the fact that she, in this case, where she's an ASU professor, right? And she even knows that herself because during the conversation she says, "I'm a professor," as if being a professor.
Do you know who I am?
Right. Exactly. And you go back to the Henry Louis Gates situation, same thing. Gates was like, "Well, I'm a Harvard professor. You can't do this to me." So, I mean, are we somehow implying that it's okay to do that to somebody else because they're poor? And then I link that to Andrea James, who held the Free Her March and Rally. And I respect Andrea James so much. I love the fact that she's holding this rally. But one of the things that she admits to that made her such an empowered activist on the issue is that she was a lawyer that went to prison. She got involved in some bad real estate deals and got sent to prison. So her feeling at first was like, this isn't supposed to happen to me. Like, I went to college. I have an education. I have money. I'm not supposed to even be here, right? But she connected to what the other women were going through and said, I don't want to leave my sisters behind. And then you take that final step and you see that there's a similarity with Orange Is the New Black. What do they do with that show? They deliberately place the main character, Piper, whatever her name is, and they make her this sort of like middle class, blonde hair, blue eyed, every woman, to say, look, you're living this cushy little life, and then suddenly you're thrust into this living hell. Let's see what that hell is like for her, and let's see how you would react in this situation. So they're connecting the atrocities of prison to average everyday Americans and making us more sensitive to the fact that this could happen to anybody, and you shouldn't ignore it just because it's happening to certain people. Just because it's more likely to happen to poor black and brown people, you shouldn't somehow allow yourself to minimize their pain and by thinking that that they go through this system, that they expect to go through it, that they're not tortured as much by going through this as you would be. And in fact, I took serious issue with Henry Louis Gates and his approach to his police interaction because I said, wait a minute, there are black men in your own city who have been shot by the police, beat by the police, unjustly incarcerated, and you have not said a word. But yet you expect the whole black community to suddenly rally behind you because this happened to a Harvard professor. Well, I say you can go to hell with that crap. I mean, no, it shouldn't happen to anybody. So I didn't mean to be long-winded with what I said there, but I'll let you get the last word because I know I just said a lot. But it doesn't does it ever seem to you that sometimes the reason we allow the atrocities of police brutality, mass incarceration, etc. Sometimes we let it go by because it's happening to those people.
To an extent, because I think, I believe Dr. Orr has her PhD, of course, Henry Louis Gates, he's educated and whatnot. So I think you kind of reach a point in your career where you say, wait a minute, I'm one of the elite. I'm above, the everyday mundane occurrences that happen. This should not happen to me. But I think pair that with the fact that, it was her university. It was Arizona State Police. So they should know, I would think, who the professors are and, recognize her. I can literally walk on my campus and they would say, the police officers there, hey, Dr. Jones, how are you doing? They recognize me by my face. If I park in an illegal parking spot, they will usually just write a note on your car, like, you're not supposed to park here, which I know I'm not, but I still do sometimes. But they're not slamming me on the ground. There's a way that you communicate. And maybe that was because he's a rookie cop. He hasn't realized or recognized all the professors that are there. There's a lot of professors at Arizona State University. But, at the same time, it's her university. They should treat their professors with a certain level of decency and humility. I don't understand why that was so difficult with this particular encounter. But it does speak to a whole another issue of issues of class, because you have to factor that in as well, that you do kind of get to a certain point when this shouldn't happen to me. But there are a lot of scholars who are out there who do speak to the issues that the average no-name people are going through that are involved in the criminal justice system. Oftentimes, it doesn't get a lot of publicity. It usually takes that one person who, has credentials, who this should not have happened to. But at the end of the day, no one is immune to injustices within the criminal justice system. And this is just another case of that. So it is very unfortunate.
Well,
And
I agree with you, and I would say now one thing I think we can say out of fairness to the ASU police is that, remember, your campus is smaller now. Ohio Dominican is not, and when you get to these bigger campuses, you have police that sometimes have to deal with real stuff.
right.
They have rapes, they have assaults, they have sometimes they have murders. Even at Syracuse, there were a couple of murders that occurred either on our campus or near our campus. And so police, I think, in those situations, or even here, I'll give you a perfect example. In Chicago, where I live, the University of Chicago police are always roaming around here, but they're prepared for real stuff. They've had to get into shootouts with people and stuff like that. And you would think, well, wait a minute, it's the University of Chicago. It's not a big school. It's an uppity kind of environment. But they're also dealing with the community around them and the people that come from the community onto campus and into their space, right? So maybe, perhaps, sometimes police, I think, can become so jaded, so threatened, so fearful sometimes of all the things that they could encounter, that they maybe become paranoid. But at the same time, though, I think it doesn't apply here, because I don't think Dr. Jones, or I'm sorry, I said Dr. Jones, but Dr. Orr, she didn't appear to be a threat, right? I think he knew that she wasn't a threat, and I think it was a rookie mistake, and they probably need to drop the charges, but I'm guessing they won't drop the charges, but I think that they're going to save face by making her pay some sort of debt and having some sort of accountability for what she did, but I would doubt that she would lose her job and or do any jail time. If that were to happen, I think the backlash would be incredibly uncomfortable for them. Because, I mean, they're already known as being the school that wouldn't give Barack Obama an honorary doctorate. You remember that?
Yeah. Well, they have a lot. There's a lot of Arizona, that state. They have a lot of issues with racial profiling and all that immigration stuff over there. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a
Mm-hmm.
unique state.
Yeah, it's an interesting place. Well, I appreciate you giving me all this time, and I originally planned for us to just talk for a couple minutes, but I just think this issue is so interesting. There's so many tangents, and then again, I yap a lot, so I hope that my yapping added some value to what people were seeing. So I want to say thank you so much, Dr. Chenelle Jones. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, you are very, very welcome. This is always good.
Yes, it's always fun, always rewarding. I always learn from you, as well as Dr. Byron Price, who I actually need to call him back. Dr. Price actually reached out to me this week about holding a national. He wants to convene a national conference for entrepreneurship for formerly incarcerated people. So I'm going to be reaching out to you about that too. And anybody else who's interested in being a part of this, you can email me at boyce@boycewatkins.com, or you can also reach out to us on Facebook. There's always a good conversation going on. And I really want you to check out Dr. Chenelle Jones at Ohio Dominican University. She is a noted criminologist. She also wrote a great article, 10 Ways to Interact with the Police. It's on culturecritic.com, so go take a look, and let's avoid these situations in the future. So until we meet again, please stay strong, be blessed, and be educated. We are gone. Peace.